Welcome everybody to our Committee of the Whole meeting. It is Tuesday, August 16th, and we are meeting for the Vancouver School Board for a committee meeting. The purpose of our meeting is to go over items that will appear on next month's regular board meeting for action. So today there's no action that we will take tonight, but we will just be reviewing and discussing, asking questions about upcoming items. So before we get started, we will go ahead and start with a roll call. I will start with Director Decker.
I'm here.
Director Smith.
Here.
Director Sproul.
Here.
And Director Zavala.
Yeah.
Perfect. We are all here. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Snell for to run through our agenda.
Thank you, Director Barros. Welcome everyone to the Committee of the Whole meeting. I have just a couple of updates before we start walking through the agenda items. I wanted to talk just a little about our back to school communication. And so it's 2 weeks from today is our first day of school. It's hard to believe, but it's coming up quickly, and we're starting to see the activities ramp up as well. We have some information scheduled to go out to families towards the end of this week. Specifically, we want to share back to school information, just the normal kinds of things, but also the update on COVID-19 protocols. As we discussed in our last board meeting, the Department of Health guidance really is largely similar to what we had in place at the end of the last school year. And so that's good news from a standpoint of not having to communicate a whole bunch of new protocols or processes for our families as they return. But we know that's on everybody's minds as they're gearing up for a school year. And then we'll follow that communication up with other messages as we get closer to the start of school. I'm speaking to the messages from the district, but of course there's also the school communication that will come out and teacher communication as well. So we're really excited about that. As I mentioned the last time, the DOH updates, nothing really new here except the last bullet. We did meet with Clark County Public Health earlier this week and discussed what would happen if there were outbreaks. And if you recall, prior to COVID-19, we actually had measles outbreaks in Clark County that impacted schools. And so there's some protocols in place that if there's certain amount of cases, and of course, each situation is always a little unique, but they just let us know that they may intervene at some point and either require or recommend different mitigation layer increases dependent on the situation, just to try to make sure that we're keeping students and staff safe, but also trying to keep schools open and minimize the impact of an outbreak. So not really sure what that will look like. Hopefully it's something that we don't necessarily have to address, but wanted to kind of just keep you all in the loop that those conversations are happening. And that, I believe, was all I had from superintendent's report today, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that or any other topics. Okay, so then I will invite, I think, Director Barros, is it okay if we just start working through that agenda? Okay.
Yes.
And of course, it looks like my my board docs logged me out in the time that we were waiting. Okay, now we're back up and running. So we are previewing the September regular meeting tonight. And we'll start with contracts, and then there are some policy items. And so I think Brett's going to take the lead on the contracts, and then I believe Mary Lee is going to take the lead on some of the policies. And as usual, questions are welcome tonight, and also follow up as we prepare for the September agenda. So Brett, are you ready?
I am. Thank you. All right, well, if everybody's ready, we'll go ahead and just launch right into a series of contracts and agreements that we're going to recommend that you consider taking action on, again, as Jeff mentioned, at your September meeting. First one that we have on the agenda appropriately is the Hello Foundation. So this is a renewal of a contract that we've had in previous years to provide contracted services for certificated school psychologists, speech language pathologists, and occupational therapists. And again, you'll see, I think we have 3 or 4 of these this cycle. And so I just want to benchmark all of them with the same, I guess, conditions that we only resort to the contract providers when we're unable to attract and recruit our own dedicated staff in these areas. Our preference is to have our own employees doing this work, but for a variety of reasons, sometimes we need to jigsaw puzzle with these contractors. So again, the first one is Hello Foundation. The estimated amount is $371,000 for the year. And again, it's for those school psychologists, SLPs, and OT services that we may need to avail ourselves of. Questions on Hello Foundation? All right, then we'll move right into a renewal of a long-term agreement that we've had with ESD 112 to provide audiologist services. This renewal is for an approximate 0.8 FTE audiologist. There's a whole suite of services that this specialized staff will perform for our students, supporting our own work with students with potential hearing challenges. This renewal is estimated to be for $107,138 for the next coming school year. Questions on audiologist services with ESD 112? All right, then we'll move into another renewal of the specialized services. This one is a recommendation to renew our agreement with Maxim Healthcare Services. Maxim has provided for us in the past a whole slew of different healthcare provider services, specifically registered nurses, licensed or LPNs. I'm not exactly sure what that stands for. OTs, SLPs, behavior techs, board certified behavior analysts, and registered behavior technicians, as well as occasionally paraprofessional supports in specialized areas. This has been obviously a wide-ranging services, and they've been a very successful partner with us. Our recommendation is to renew this agreement in the amount potentially of $2.5 million to meet all of those various needs as they occur, and we're not able to meet them with our own staff. Questions on Maxim Healthcare Services? All right, then we'll move forward into another one in the similar vein of specialized service providers. This one is an independent contract agreement with LSJ Consultants. As you can see, LSJ provides licensed school psychologists on a per hour or prorated basis based on our needs. Pretty straightforward. Our recommendation is that we approve this new agreement with this new provider to augment that roster of services that we can bring to bear as needed. The estimated amount could be $172,000 for this LSJ Consultant independent contractor. Questions on it?
I don't have any questions, but just as background for kind of all of the last ones that we've just kind of covered, as somebody who works in special services, I would say it's very helpful to have these contracts in place, because like you said, if we don't have the staffing, it's helpful to be able to immediately be able to get somebody to provide services. So just putting that out there to help advocate for these contracts.
Absolutely, thank you. There's no other thoughts on those. We have 2 more at the back end of the agenda, so we'll revisit that kind of concept. But for now, we'll depart quickly to go into a recommendation to renew our insurance coverages. And as you've read, there's a whole slew of different levels of insurance for various unfortunate outcomes that we might experience. But the bulk of the renewal is about a 6.8% increase, which is high, but it's actually less than it's been in previous years. The other thing that I just want to benchmark around those rates is not only are we fighting inflation and really a litigious environment? But we're also increasing the value of our property through the great projects that our bond has financed. And so in light of all of that, 6.8% is not pleasant, but it's actually a pretty surprisingly low number when you consider all of that. So we're pleased with that. So anyway, it's our recommendation that we renew the insurance coverage, which is really facilitated through our broker Biggs Insurance, which is now part of Alliant Insurance Services. And the coverage would be placed with the School Insurance Association of Washington, SIAW, in the amount not to exceed $3,550,000, and then a separate policy or rider for earthquake coverage in the amount of $129,055. Questions on a very detailed renewal? All right, then we'll move into a couple projects that are funded by our Capital Projects Fund that are now completed. And as we experienced pretty much every month for the last year or two, we just have to have board formally accept it to advance the project through the last steps of release of retainage and sign off by various state agencies. So the first one of those closed projects that we would recommend that you accept in September is a purchase agreement number 2021-015 for carpet at the Heights campus. The vendor on this was Beresford Company through a contract administered by King County Directors Association, or KCDA. The final amount of this Beresford contract was $99,553.55 plus Washington State sales tax. And then I'll just quickly highlight the next one, and then we'll pause if there's any questions. The second in that similar project completion acceptance process is our bid number 2021-025 for secure entrances and FCRC work at Hudson's Bay High School, Discovery Middle School, and Washington Elementary School. And again, the vendor on that was First Cascade Corp. And the final amount was $387,281.43 plus Washington State sales tax. Any questions or comments on those relatively minor but appreciated capital projects funded by the bond that are now completed? All right, then we'll wrap up with a couple late additions to our suite of service providers that augment our staff to provide those highly specialized services on an as-needed basis. The next one is recommendation to approve a client service agreement with Sprout Therapy Solutions. And as you've read, they provide occupational therapists, physical therapists, nurses, speech language pathologists, and school psychologists on an as-needed basis. It's our recommendation that we engage in this agreement with an estimated amount of up to $60,000 for those services. And again, this would be a new vendor or new contractor to provide that flexibility that Tracy just described. Questions on Sprout Therapy Solutions? And then the last one, which is also another specialty provider for special services needs of our students. This one is a agreement for services between VPS and Ampersand Therapy. And you can see that Ampersand provides potentially for us special education teachers, occupational therapists, physical therapists, nurses, SLPs, and school psychologists. It's our recommendation that we engage in a new contract with Ampersand Therapy in an estimated amount of $120,000 to provide those services as needed. Questions or comments on that? And I think that is all of our vendor contracts. I guess I'll just mention real quickly, and I don't know if Jeff has anything to add, but you'll notice there's a placeholder for action, hopefully in September, regarding the management team agreement, which again is bargained through VAPA, which represents our school administrators. And we briefed you throughout the discussions with VAPA leadership. We're happy to announce we have a TA that they'll be taking to their members, and assuming everything wraps up with their members, we'll be able to provide the recommendation for you all to formally accept it in September.
Thank you, Brett. Any questions on any of items 1 through 10? Just one last call. Okay, item 11 is also a placeholder. If you recall, we went through a process to solicit requests to support us through a consultation contract in support of the strategic planning process. And so we have not officially awarded that contract. Basically, when we went through the process, we from the board direction wanted to kind of understand better what the board would like to see out of that from a community engagement standpoint. And so Point North did interviews of all board directors and leadership team to have a better understanding of what the scope and sequence for a strategic plan could look like. And we're going to spend some time in our study session next Tuesday to go through that plan to just kind of get your final endorsement before we formalize a contract with that partner. And so next Tuesday, we'll have 2 major agenda items in the study session, the strategic planning process, and then Brett will join us again to talk about you adopted a budget at the August meeting, and now our levy will expire this coming year. And so the process for renewing a levy, we want to start that with the board. We've had some individual conversations leading up to that, but we want to kind of publicly get your feedback on what that renewal should look like. So those are the 2 items that we would be filling in at the study session. And as always, there could be other things that come up. But any questions on the strategic planning agreement at this point? Okay. So I will turn it over to Marilee. We have a series of first readings that are scheduled to come before you. And as usual, Marilee can give you just a brief overview, and then there's opportunities for you to engage with us, not just here, but in between now and that regular meeting. So Marilee, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Dr. Schnell. There are 5 policies for your consideration and to ask questions, as Dr. Schnell said. And all of these updates are a result of recent legislative changes. The first one is policy 1400, which is the board's policy on meeting conduct and order of business. There are 2 major changes being proposed in that board policy. One is to update the conditions for an emergency meeting. The legislature passed several new provisions outlining the conditions for the board to call an emergency meeting. For example, the board does not have to meet at its regular meeting site. They could limit attendance at those emergency meetings and implement other conditions that the board deems necessary. So we added that language to your policy. In addition to that, the legislature updated the provisions regarding public comment. Many of those provisions this board already had in place. For example, providing an opportunity for public comment at each of your meetings where you plan to take action. So that's policy 1400. And I'll just go through them and then ask for your questions after I finish all 5. The second one is policy 3122. It involves excused and unexcused absences. The legislature added a provision that a student's absence can be for mental health reasons, and that would be an excused absence. So that's a new provision that was added last session. The third policy update is for policy 3432 that deals with emergencies within a school building, that is. And the new provisions the legislature added prohibits schools from conducting lockdown drills that include live simulations or reenactments of active shooter scenarios, unless those scenarios are trauma-informed and age and developmentally appropriate. So we added that language to your policy so that lockdown drills are held appropriately. The fourth policy update is for policy 4210. That policy is regulation of dangerous weapons on school premises. The new language that the legislature added prohibits individuals from knowingly carrying or possessing firearms or other weapons in areas of facilities while those facilities are being used for official meetings of a board of directors. So really it's a clarification of the existing federal law prohibiting weapons on school premises. So we added that language to the board policy as well. And the final policy update is a new policy, policy 4218 on language access. The legislature requires every school board in the state to have this policy in place by October 2022. And the language access policy requires every school district to have a language access program that is culturally responsive and which provides for systemic family engagement. So what you have before you for your consideration next month is the policy, and then staff, the appropriate staff will work on the procedure to implement those language access programs. So with that, I will take any questions you have on any of those 5 policies.
Mary Lee, on the language access program, I'm just clarifying, is that they have access to being communicated with in their native language? Or are we talking about educational programs?
We're talking about communication in their native language. There are 5 primary features of the policy. One is identifying families who need those access services, providing the oral interpretation, providing the written translation, and making sure there's staff available within the school district to provide those services.
Great. I just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Sure.
I actually have a handful of questions about almost all of them.
Okay.
So bear with me, sorry, Mary Lee. And the first one that you went over about our meetings and emergency, like giving options for different locations for emergency meetings and whatnot. There's a lot that was added into that. So I'm scrolling quickly and I'm having a hard time finding it, but I bet you know what I'm talking about. There was something in there about an emergency, not necessarily needing to give notice for a meeting. Was I reading that correctly?
You were reading that
Okay.
correctly. If the emergency situation is such that the district, the board chair, the board does not have an opportunity to give notice, the law allows them to go ahead and convene that meeting.
Okay. And I can't find it now, but I'll find it later. And I had a question about it, so I may email you about that one. but I was reading that correctly.
Yes.
And then I also had a question about the attendance policy. I'm sorry, I opened all of these and now I have to find it. Here it is. It talks about attendance for asynchronous and synchronous instruction. And one of it talked about needing to log in for synchronous like there's an online class, the teacher's teaching an online class. I'm wanting to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So when I read it, I envisioned there's an online class, the teacher's live, but online, like in Zoom or Google Meet, something like that, and teaching a in live time lesson. In order to be counted present, they would need to log into that lesson. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is this for our alternative programs as well? Is this a blanket policy for all of our programs?
I read it as blanket for all of our programs. I didn't see a distinction.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we might be interested in exploring policy that's a little bit more nuanced for our online programs, because it's just a different sort of learning platform. I was reading this as if we were to have to close down schools and provide online education, and this is like a normal classroom sort of thing, but I don't know, I'm envisioning like there are all kinds of different reasons why students might choose, and I'm curious to hear what other board directors think about this, an online platform. And one of those reasons may be that they cannot, for whatever reason, attend a synchronous lesson in real time, if that makes sense. So now they're going to be marked absent, but they chose that program for the additional flexibility that it provides for, but now they're going to be marked absent. Like it doesn't seem like it might be the best fit for those sort of programs. Am I making sense? I hope I'm making sense. So I'm just curious, I'm thinking that we might maybe explore something a little, like I said, a little bit more nuanced for those type alternative programs.
Yes, I understand your comment, and the language wasn't intended to penalize the student that you described that for whatever reason is not is online, but not in a synchronous way. So the goal, as I understand it, was to make sure that whatever format the student is attending in, they get counted as present. So if
Right,
that
that's how I read it too. It seemed like it was very forgiving, actually, in terms of how they might be counted present. With that maybe that one exception.
I'll be happy to see if I can clarify that language and then send out a rewrite or an edit to make sure that that's clear, because the intent is if that student would not be penalized.
Right. And then my last question, I don't know so much as a question as, well, maybe it has to do with the regulation of dangerous weapons on school premises. And it's just the first part that gets struck and the new language entered in. I'm thinking maybe something was struck that wouldn't have been struck because just syntax, it wasn't making any sense. The first line where it says it's a violation of district policy for any person to knowingly carry a firearm, and then just says areas of other facilities. And I'm thinking something got struck that maybe shouldn't have been.
Okay, I'll be happy to take a look at that. I think you're right. It should be firearm or other dangerous weapon on school premises.
Right. Okay. That was my question. I'm assuming that that language would be retained.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that's it. I will find that other language and I'll email you my question that I had about the board meetings.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions? And please, thank you, Director Smith, for following up with the email. If there are other things that come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. It's great to make sure that these are clear as we move forward, because the policies are going to guide our practice, and so we want to make sure that we work through some of those. So appreciate the feedback. I appreciate Marilee's work in drafting these and presenting them this evening. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think that's it. We will have financial statements as usual, and probably have an executive session to discuss employee performance at the September meeting, and don't anticipate any other special meetings or anything of that nature, closed meetings. As Brett mentioned, we are working on a couple of contracts, just finishing things up, but we think that hopefully optimistically those will be ready and not require some of those other supports. So.
All right. With that, as Dr. Snell had mentioned, next week we do have our study session that is virtual at 5:30. We have some topics to talk about, as Dr. Snell had mentioned, the strategic planning and talking about levy options. With that, is there anything else from my fellow directors? And by the time, well, no, I was gonna say next Tuesday we will not be back to school. By the time we have our next regular meeting, we will be well into the swing of things. And so it's exciting. I mean, it's always a little sad when summer break kind of comes to an end, but it's always exciting to get back in schools and kind of start fresh. And I think it's going to be a good school year. So it is 6 o'clock and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.